So, good evening, everybody. It's Paul Woodadge again, WW2 TV, for another NAAFI Natters. We're going to talk war films, specifically those with a spy and or resistance connection. After the hijinks last night, I've talked about Spike Milligan with Stuart Lee. We're just back to a group of similar people to talk about movies tonight. Some of them you know before, some of you don't know. I've hijacked one from History Hack. I've borrowed some others. I've begged, borrowed, and stolen, but my group of experts tonight, I won't do massive introductions, but Lance Nielsen, a director and scriptwriter, screenwriter. You may know about him from his projects about 6th Airborne. We'll talk about that later on. Stephen Wisdom, who I've known for bloody 30 years or something, set builder, actor, film creator, video interpreter, playwright, you name it. Matt Boney, just a bloke I know, talks about typhoons mostly. Colin is my mate from round the corner, tour guide, poet, bon vivant, all that kind of stuff. Joe, I've known a while as well. Joe's a big Normandy buff, 101st Airborne, met at Band of Brothers reunions, like that kind of stuff. Paul Beaver, army flyer, lecturer, writer, historian, advisor to the government, you name it, he's done it. And James, I borrowed in from History Hack to be a younger presence, to bring the average age down a little bit. Just someone has to. So we're going to talk about
thanks for that, Paul. Yeah. Cheers for that.
So we're going to talk about movies and spy movies. So we're going to start with Lance first, because his choice is going to surprise people, because it's a rather odd one. So Lance, your choice for movie is?
Yeah, I mean, because my first impression of resistance in films, like a lot of you, I imagine, those of us that are older the age of 45, was people in sort of, you know, berets blowing up telegraph poles in The Longest Day, and John has a long moustache and all that. And that was the first time I'd ever seen the resistance portrayed in any film. So I had a very romantic notion of what being in the French resistance meant as a young film buff. I think I watched Longest Day when I was 5. It wasn't until I saw Lacombe Lucien. Now you can get rid of the picture, Paul, because I've actually got a copy of it here. I can hold it up.
So cool.
So Lacombe Lucien. Now, somebody told me about this film. I think I got it about 4 years ago. And the main character is a young lad who's a bit disillusioned with life. There's no job opportunities. This is set in France during World War II. It's predominantly set around kind of 42, 43, going into 44. He's kind of estranged from his parents. And of course, a lot of people in France in World War II, it was kind of, you either did nothing, you helped the resistance, or you collaborated with the Germans. And what's interesting, really interesting about this film, for me, is it showed the sort of nuances of that and the complexities of to what degree you could collaborate or not collaborate, and would that label you as a collaborator, and how young people could get drawn into one side or the other as a bit more of a romantic notion rather than a political thing. And for this story about this kid, he's kind of almost drawn into it because it like a career choice, because he hasn't got anything else going on, and he looks up to the French characters who are collaborating with the Germans, who have an affluent lifestyle. They drive nice cars, they have nice dinners, and they have access to good food. So for him, it seems like the more positive choice, without him really thinking about the long-term ramifications. Now, the other thing that's interesting, I just want to talk about another film that sort of links into this one a bit, is that most of you would have heard of a film called Days of Glory, which is a fantastic film about the Algerian free French soldiers that fought for France in World War II, and then were very much maligned by the French government afterwards. And eventually they had their pensions cut when Algeria declared independence. There's a really fantastic film, which many of you probably won't have seen. I just want to get the title right. It's called Outside the Law. Outside the Law. And it's made by the same team of Days of Glory. And that's about the conflict between the Algerian Free French movement in Paris and the organisation that was set up to defeat them by the French government. Now, that organization was called the Red Hand. And the Red Hand was basically given authority to do absolutely anything outside the law, to kill these Algerian people. And the Red Hand was made up of people that had all fought for the French resistance in World War II. So if you're going to watch this film, you want to watch this film with Days of Glory and then watch Outside the Law. And that will give you a really comprehensive, very nuanced view of the complexities involved in the politics of France that were going on behind the scenes, and all the different factions that were vying for power, both during World War II and immediately afterwards. And it certainly wasn't as simple as men in berets getting radio calls from London and blowing up telegraph poles, which is very much the Hollywoodized version. And of course, there were people doing that. I'm not maligning that. And that's why I really like this film. This is not an easy film to watch. It's not one you're going to rewatch many times. And it's also really sad because the lead actor, this was his first big movie and the first time he played a leading role. And he went and spent all his paycheck on a sports car, which he then wrapped round a tree, and he died shortly after the film was shot. So it's got a kind of a sad story with it as well. It's a really interesting movie and a very, very realistic depiction of the choices that people faced in France at that time and what happened to somebody who made the wrong choice, which I think is really interesting to explore. And it's not, you know, we don't normally see films from a collaborator's point of view. It's always the good guys. So I really like that movie, and I really like Days of Glory, which isn't Resistance, but it links into this narrative very well. And then if you watch Outside the Law, which is what the French resistance guys ended up doing, a lot of them ended up doing all this illegal shit for the French government after World War II. Those are three films really worth watching together, maybe as a marathon, and it will give you a really different insight into the meaning of French resistance from a number of different.
Has anyone else watched it here? Anyone else seen it?
Not watched it, but it was interested with what Lance was saying there, because the character that me and my colleague do mention in one of our performances, he turns into, after the war, French resistance agent, and he turns into a really unappealing character. And often when you read about this guy, he just disappears out of the story because he turns into such an unappealing character. And actually hearing Lance talking there about the way that the resistance, it doesn't just stop in 1945 and everybody goes and starts a little restaurant and, you know, whatever, cafe on the street and talks about their wartime experiences blowing up telegraph poles. They do carry on. And actually this guy who we talk about is very much part of that. So it's really interesting, Lance talking about that. I'm going to just made a note of that film and we'll give it a watch.
And the director Louis Malle did Atlantic City and My Dinner with Andre. So he made some American films as well. I mean, he had a good track record. And, you know, we'll bring up to Matt's point. Well, Matt's film is a French-made film and Joe's film is a French-made film. And you know, I live in France, as people watching know. And Mag, my other half, is always telling me that the nuance of the French occupation is not normally got across well in your British and American-made films, where everybody's either incredibly heroic or incredibly evil. And of course, the great majority of the French and the Belgians and Norwegians were living under an occupation. They were just trying to stay alive, frankly. They were just trying to live from one day to the other without necessarily taking sides. So anything that looks into complexity, and Mag would recommend to accompany the series Un Village Français, which was a long-running French TV show, stopped about 5 or 6 years ago. I didn't watch much of it, well, hardly any, because it wasn't subtitled. And it was very good, Mag said, because it covered all the nuance of when you agree to provide hay or milk for the Germans, are you therefore collaborating? But you're doing it because if you don't, you get shot. And it goes through the whole pre-war, war, and it also takes it beyond the war, and then what happens after war, and the look at the people who are women who'd slept with Germans, men who'd been trading with the Germans, and it goes into all that complexity. And you know, I always say to my tour clients, when we had tour clients, you know, to understand the French occupation, you have to speak to someone French. Speaking to me, a Brit, apart from the Channel Islands, we weren't occupied. We don't have a voice. We don't have a say in the story.
Woody, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things that I think is so interesting about this, I've seen Norwegian programs as well, which and films, which show this real dichotomy that people had between actually staying alive and being able to do something afterwards, and then or being cast as some sort of, in Norway's case, a quisling. But there wasn't the same retribution in Norway as there was in France. And of course, France went in after the war into virtually a civil war. There were real issues with communists, with latent fascists, with those who'd been in Vichy. It's a completely different setup in France, I think, in the 1946, 47, 48 period, the end of the Third Republic, which is really nuanced, as Lance says, you know, and Stephen says, and you have to actually see French-made movies to understand that, and you have to be able to speak to people, and there aren't many left now who lived through that. To understand it. And we Brits who've not been successfully invaded for 1,000 years or whatever it is, we have real difficulty in understanding that. I remember Richard Holmes saying to me that if he'd been in France in 1940, he could well have been a Vichy, because that was the way of keeping France and the honor of France alive and all of that. So you get into all sorts of discussions like that. And the more movies there are that explore these nuances, I think the better it is, particularly for the rest of us in Europe, but absolutely for the Americans.
Yeah, I mean, Mag and I watched Lance's film last year, and we were like, as you said, Lance, it's not an easy watch. It's like, because it's you're kind of rooting for the bad guy, but you're not rooting for the bad guy. It's much more modern. It's in a sense, it's got that kind of Peaky Blinders modern anti-hero, where the hero that you're rooting for is actually a bad person, because the young lad is on the side of the German, so you don't want him to succeed, but you do want him to, say, as Lance said, to have a better life. He's trying to get something out of it. There's no, as you said, there's no work, there's no food, and you can kind of understand his choices even if you don't agree with them. I think that's what makes it interesting. So
yeah, it's I mean, at some point in the film, they're actually setting people up to who aren't actually doing anything to do with the resistance, to get their quota up and to look good for the Germans. There's one scene where they set up a doctor who they think might be helping the resistance, but they're not sure. So they just decide to set him up and then have him arrested, which is, that for me was really, that was such a bitter pill to swallow. By the way, Paul, I forgot to mention, and it's probably relevant, my father was actually in the Danish resistance. In World War II. Yeah, I should have mentioned that before. This is a picture of him here in his war uniform.
Fantastic.
Him and his two brothers, they smuggled British airmen. In fact, there were four of them. Sorry, one of the brothers committed suicide not long after the war finished. I think that had something to do with the war. I'm not exactly sure. There's my father on a wrecked Kubelwagen in North Africa. Because he travelled round right round Europe immediately after the war. He basically went backpacking. Not many people did that back then, let alone with a camera. So I have all of his photos from that trip. But yeah, they smuggled British airmen and Jews out of Denmark, and the main thing that they did was they smuggled Jews to Sweden. But they actually hid some British airmen from the SS in his town, and the SS came in and searched throughout the town, and he told me a lot of stories about the whole thing in Denmark, and they were really hated, the Nazis in there. He couldn't say the word Nazi without anger on his face.
It's interesting, Lance, isn't it? Because the whole Denmark thing is in itself, it's its own monicosm of what was going on. So if you look at and as you know, I do air. If you look at the list of Danish aces, most of them were flying Bf-110s as night fighter pilots on the Eastern Front. There are very few who managed to get away and join the Royal Air Force, because when the Germans walked in on what was it, the 9th of April, 1940, it was very quick. When 9th, when they walked in, it was
8th or 9th.
It was very, very quick, and there wasn't a battle. It wasn't like France or even the Netherlands and Belgium. And they were really caught with what they could do and what they couldn't do. I mean, I've got a lot of time for the Danes who actually did something, who worked against the Nazis, because it wasn't what most people were doing then in Denmark. So it's really interesting to hear your story.
Yeah,
and just for those watching, that I did a panel discussion a few months ago with 3 Danish historians about Denmark in World War II. So go back through World War II TV panel discussions, you'll find the show. I had 3 of Denmark's top guys talking about it. And again, the same nuance of communism and communist resistance and royalists and this, very complicated. So, well, that's a nice introduction to the show. So who wants to go next? Do we want to move? Great, Lance. Who wants to go next?
Sure, I'll go next if you like.
Sure, Paul, we'll put you on. So
I'm going to change the pace, if you like. I'm nominating The Man Who Never Was. It was one of the first movies that, thank you, that's a great, great picture. It was one of the first movies that I saw as a child. I can remember this, I'm that old to have remembered it. What I loved about it was the fact that it talked about areas that really nobody was talking about in the 60s. At school, my housemaster had been in the Air Force in the war. The headmaster had been captured at Dunkirk. So we grew up with all of these stories about the Second World War. But when you actually saw this, it was, oh, here are the Brits being, amazingly clever. What I like about the movie, and what really excites me about the movie, is the fact that it is of its time. It's very much shows you London, actually London in the 50s, because it was shot in 56, I think. And that was about the time that, it was only 10 years after the war, London was still very much the same. And of course, the story is so intriguing because we don't really know exactly all the details, because although some of it was under the 30-year rule, some has been under the 70-year rule, but there's a lot of this story which is under the 100-year rule. And the reason for that is it links into the Double Cross Committee, the 20 Committee, which is all part of this whole thing. And, if you look at the movie, there's an Irish an IRA agent who's sent by the Nazis to check the story out. That's completely fictitious. And there are lots of fictitious things in it, but that sets the pace for the drama. I don't think they necessarily takes away from it. And now, of course, we've got the whole debate about whether the man that never was really was an itinerant Welsh rat catcher who was poisoned himself in King's Cross, or whether he was a survivor, or not a survivor, rather a casualty of the destruction of HMS Dasher. And I can remember seeing the movie and wondering, knowing English geography pretty well as a prep school boy, why it was that the submarine had to travel from the northeast coast of Britain, from Blythe, all the way around to Holyloch, which is very difficult to get to by road, in order to transfer the body. It just seemed bonkers to me, and that adds credibility to the Dasher story. So it went to Cannes, to the Cannes Film Festival. It won a BAFTA, and it's got lots of pieces in it which make it, to me, really intriguing. It's got secret operations, espionage, Naval Intelligence Department 17. Ian Fleming is involved in this. Some say that it was his idea rather than Flight Lieutenant Cholmondeley, who was the Air Force guy involved. It's got a really wacky potential love story that between some of the protagonists. I just think it's absolutely fab, and it's worth watching. And it's also worth watching Ben McIntyre, who's written probably the best book on it, his Operation Mincemeat book, which is highly recommended for anyone to read. It's still got those bits in there we don't quite know everything that came out. And of course, the whole operation was described by Hugh Trevor Roper as being the best deception operation of any military deception in any war, because the Germans were foolish enough to swallow it, or were they? And you can go into a whole debate about whether or not the Abwehr actually were trying to, in 1943, undermine Hitler as well. So it just is, it's so good. It's all full of stuff that's really good. What you don't get out of this, which I think is really interesting, is there's no mention of the 20 Committee, because that was still under the 30-year rule. And there was no mention of Enigma because that was under the 70-year rule. So, you know, it's like the Dam Busters movie where the bomb is not the shape that they show it, because it was still a classified weapon. And I think these 50s movies about spying and intelligence and espionage and deception are really cool. So, you know, my nomination, guys, is The Man Who Never Was, and I think it's one of those movies. It also has, of course, some really interesting character actors in it, British character actors that we've all loved and who just seem to wear uniforms so well.
Michael Hordern. Hordern.
because they all were. Yeah. They all have been in the military. I mean, you know, Michael being a fighter director at Yeovilton. You know, it's great. All those lovely, lovely people are in the movie, and some of them, you know, I'm just going to have a look at my prompt to make sure I get her name right. But you get in there.
Gloria Graham, you probably think.
Thank you very much. Who is, of course, a bit of a naughty girl, and there's some wonderful stories about her.
She was in It's Wonderful Life, wasn't it? I mean, Matt has just
not 9 o'clock yet, so we can't talk about it.
He loves Gloria Graham in it. I think she's awful in that film. I think she's dreadful. I think she's
awful, but she's you know, what a bird.
I love Gloria Graham in anything. She's fine. She's wonderful. In The Bad and the Beautiful, she's in it for like 6 minutes, wins an Oscar. You know, career done. Thank you.
I mean, correct. My feeling about The Man Who Never Was is it should have gone with the Germans investigating it plot rather than the spy coming over plot. That whole fictitious was just silly. That it would have been better to just have, you know, the German Abwehr looking into it. The whole, as good as Stephen Boyd is as an IRA guy, that to me just makes it's just silly.
Oh, he's excellent. And I love the way he sets up his transmitter in the bedroom. He's got real tradecraft. It really works well. He's a very believable character who never existed.
Yeah. Do we think, in reality, did the Germans send people over to investigate stuff? Because that also features in Allied as well, I think. And there's a person turns up in Allied to investigate some business.
Stephen, I just don't think they could. I mean, I think MI5 section B1A had it all wrapped up. There were, you know, after 1940, there were no successful penetrations by the Abwehr, by the Sicherheitsdienst, by any other organization that the Germans had.
But we would say that, though, wouldn't we? I mean, I agree with you, Paul, well, and that's what conventional wisdom says. But
Paul, I do a lot of research into this, and I have, you know, really good background on this. And in my view, we had it pretty well wrapped up.
Oh, I agree. I'm just being devil's advocate, really. I mean,
you're allowed to be. You're the chairman.
Yeah, that's my job. But yeah, so Man Who Never Was, great film. It's a Sunday afternoon, you know, packet of crisps, you know, can of beer kind of movie. It's great.
But it's also, Paul, it's also one to get into and start looking at, start looking at the detail. You know, and if you start doing that, you'll find that Ewan Montague, you know, wrote to Margaret Thatcher just before he died in 1985 and said, could I see the secret papers? I want to know before I die, did it really work? You know, was it really worth all the effort? And he has this huge sort of, I suppose, Philip, but by being given the papers to read, with a man watching over him, and then the papers are taken away, and they're still locked away at Kew. I think that's and even he's a really interesting guy. He's an Anglo-American Jewish guy. You know, that doesn't come out in the film. It's a really interesting study to me of it's a 1950s movie, so it's got all of those stereotypes in it, but the whole nuance, the way the sets were set up, it's fab. And I love the cars, just love the cars. You know, the little Austin 7 that they steam around in, and of course being a reservist, having reservists everywhere. Sorry, Lance.
Did you know they're making a movie of Ben's book, and it's been shot already?
What, Mincemeat?
Yeah, with Colin Firth as the lead.
Jason
Isaacs is in it. Matthew McFadden, Kelly MacDonald, Penelope.
Oh yeah, that was the one where they were looking for some D-Day troops for, wasn't it?
It's a big budget. It's like a $20-30 million, well, big budget for me. Big budget film, and it's actually based on the book, and he co-wrote the screenplay, and that's coming out. Well, I think it will be out sometime in 2021, COVID pending.
COVID pending, that's the buzzword.
But it's written with Michelle Ashford, wrote the screenplay based on Ben McIntyre's book, directed by John Madden, who is a good director. So hopefully it'll be a good movie. We'll see. But it's sticking pretty closely to the book, I think.
Well, we should move away from France for a bit and come back to France again later, because Joe is in France and Matt is in France on their films, and we should move away for a bit. So either Colin or James next, I would say, or Stephen. Who wants to go next?
I'm France. Somebody else.
Yes, I see you're France, ain't Stephen. So James, want to go next?
Yeah, I can go next quite happily.
Sure.
The movie I've picked is, most people that know me, especially from History Track, know I'm a modern movie aficionado. But I've actually gone for a classic. It was one of the first movies I saw spy-wise, and that's the Heroes of Telemark.
Oh, good choice.
Yeah, very good choice. Obviously, it's based on the real-life adventures of Knut Stroud. Knut Hawklid, but it's Knut Stroud in the movie. His book, Skis Against the Atom, and also there was another book done, but it's basically the whole screenplay and movie is based on that. The actual missions as well, the 3 operations, obviously Grouse, Freshman, and Gunnerside. Obviously Grouse being shown at the start of the movie with the Norwegian the Norwegian SOE agents going out and going back into Norway. Freshman, obviously the failure of the insertion of the commandos. I think they're Royal Engineers in the movie, but they were paratroopers in real life. The 30 of them that were killed. And then obviously Gunnerside, the successful mission to destroy the plant, even though it was fixed. And then the Heavy Water, which was obviously sunk. That operation always fascinated me. It was one of the first operations I looked at outside of movies as well, because I think it's one of the first outside movies that was focused on resistance movements in other countries. I think mostly it was France before that. So to have quite a few focused on Norway. It also showed a lot about the Norwegian people, as Paul mentioned, how many of them reacted, how many of them survived. I think the only comparison I can think of at the moment is the modern movie, The 12th Man, which is a great movie I'd suggest for anyone as well, which really focused on the Norwegian people.
You know, Norway made a mini-series about this mission as well. Have you seen that?
Yes, a recent one. I haven't seen it yet.
Really
I know
good.
It's very good, very accurate, and really well made. I think 4 parts, was it? Like 4 90-minute parts or something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
It's really good. And I've got some personal on this, because my son, Jack, is half Norwegian. His Norwegian grandmother, her cousin, was one of the guys. The family comes from the Telemark. So we've been to Vemork, which is where the heavy water plant still is. I mean, it's still part of Norsk Hydro. And it's really interesting to talk to people there about it. And I found it really interesting because Granny Lila's now passed away. But at 16, she was in the Free Norwegian Resistance, and she was picked up. And she was let go, but her brother is the only Norwegian to have died at Sachsenhausen, been executed there. Actually, he died of pneumonia So in our family, we have a real interest in the whole Norwegian scene, and it's a bit like your parents, Lance, or your father in Norway. Sorry, in Denmark, because there is this. You know, a lot of in the West, in Bergen, for example, the 5 main or 8 main families in Bergen are all Germans. They're all Hanseatic League Germans. They've got names like Naumann and whatever. And the trading relationship between Norway and Germany was really close. And if you speak Norwegian, you can read German. If you speak German, you can read Norwegian. And so that there's the linguistic connections as well. It's a really good choice, James, actually. The movie, by the way, most Norwegians think it's really funny, but then but you know, don't we about everything that's, you know, like I don't know, the first.
They really played down the communism side. Yeah, because all the saboteurs were quite communist, and then it was effectively a remake of a French-Norwegian collaboration movie of the same name as the miniseries, actually. I think it was done in 1948. They had most of the saboteurs play themselves as well, which is, they've said it's a lot better than Heroes of Telemark, but I can't judge it because try find a movie from 1948.
It falls into that theirs is the glory category of it's worthy, but the acting is terrible. But because it's the Knut Haukelid is in it, and it's I've got a copy of it. It's a good one. This is for those watching. The modern remake is the Saboteurs there, which I have to go point for just because Anna Friel wearing battle dress. I mean, frankly, that's enough for me. Forget the action. Anna Friel in battle dress. That sounds awfully sexist, but she is rather lovely in that. So it's a great film. And Heroes of Telemark, I think, is. You're right, James. It's authentic, but they do miss a lot of the boring bits out there. You know, the fact that the saboteurs spent like 3 months in the fjords eating reindeer moss to survive. That bit kind of gets knocked out. And Kirk Douglas's character is an amalgamation of about 3 Knuts, isn't he? Because in the movie he does everything, whereas in reality the guys who set the drop zone weren't the same guy who did Gunnerside. The guys on the ferry weren't the same guys there. So but you can understand why Hollywood did it, and it's still a cracking movie. Richard Harris is good as well, and Michael
and they found the ferry as well. They've done a survey of the ferry recently as well.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw a little bit about that. Aren't they surveying barrels that they're finding on the bottom of the fjord to read levels of, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't they check levels of radiation or something coming out from them? I believe.
There's a guy that's doing his PhD. He's been doing the MBES surveys across the fjord and of the ferry itself. And then there is, I can't remember whether it's him and someone else that's checking the leakage from the barrels, if there's any leakage or radiation.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. I'd seen that. I thought it was very interesting.
And great movie. Can't fault it.
Something that you just do not associate with the Second War, that you're dealing with pollution from potential radiation that isn't in Japan and it is in a Norwegian fjord, and I find that just fascinating. And it's that whole kind of sub-site or sub-history that we just are not really aware of. Everybody thinks about radiation. You think about Hiroshima, you think about Nagasaki. You don't think about what's sitting at the bottom of a fjord, and I find that fascinating. I really do. It's really good choice. Really interesting subject.
You're on fire, James, because the other week you went for The King's Choice, which I hadn't seen, and it's incredible. And now you've gone for Heroes of Telemark, which I completely forgot. Damn you, is all I have to say.
If you want another movie recommendation from the modern movies, I'd also go The Resistance Banker.
Yeah, that's on Netflix. Great. I love that film. Really, really good movie.
Yeah, The 12th Man is a bit cliche with the at least the bad guy, but the rest of The 12th Man is brilliant.
Yeah, I've got a friend in The 12th Man. He plays the baddie German.
The cliche baddie.
Yeah, very over the top.
I think if we're going to talk about cliches, we've kind of got to go with Joe's choice next, female agents, I think, because that's cliche abound. And poor Joe, I put her on the spot because I wanted another female to join, and Sally was going to drop out. So Joe only agreed to do this yesterday. So she's been busy watching stuff on Amazon Prime and Netflix to be there. So thank you for that, Joe. But your nomination, Joe, we'll get you done now so you can relax. Okay. So Female Agents is your choice, isn't it? And I'll put an image up with Sophie Marceau and others. So what did you tell us what you thought about it?
Yeah, first of all, I think I should mention that I'm by no means an expert in either World War II or French films, so so I don't know how accurate this is or not. I have to say though, I was pleasantly surprised. The portrayal of women in this film in particular, none of them are by any means heroes. They're all completely flawed in one way or another. So whereas you said earlier on, Paul, that British and American films tend to portray people as either being incredibly heroic or incredibly evil, I think this was great in showing that not everyone comes under those two headings. The premise of the film itself, it starts off being set in London in late May of 1944, so it's on the eve of D-Day, and a UK geologist has been captured in France, in Normandy, while he was taking samples in preparation for the invasion. He's in a German hospital pretending to be German. And the SOE has enlisted the help of a woman played by Sophie Marceau to put together a team of women to parachute into Normandy on a mission to rescue this geologist. Unbeknownst to them, there is a second part of this mission as well, which is to kill an SS colonel who has suspicions about this geologist and wants to take that then to Rommel to show him that the British are intending to, or the Allies are intending to land on the beaches of Normandy and not Calais or elsewhere as suspected. I just thought it was a great film from a female perspective. All of the female leads in it are really strong characters. As I said, flawed, but I thought it was great. They didn't need sort of rescuing by a knight in shining armor. There was no men bursting in to sweep them off their feet and save them from danger. It was them helping each other. I know it's come under some criticism though. I did read on IMDb that a lot of Resistance veterans criticized the film because some of the women were blackmailed into helping out on the operation. And they said that it portrayed them as being coerced into joining the Resistance rather than joining through patriotism. And it's also been criticised because it's the plot of it is very similar to a novel by Ken Follett, which again has 4 or 5 women parachuting into Normandy on a mission. So apart from the criticism there from the veterans and from whether or not the story's been copied, I thought it was a great film.
I agree, Joe. I thought it was a bloody lovely film. I really did. I watched it twice because of lockdown last year, and I just think it's absolutely wonderful film. I really do. And the thing I love about it is the French speak French, the Germans speak German, and the Brits speak British.
Yeah,
it's the way a war film should be. You know, I can read the subtitle. I don't need everybody to put on bad accents. I thought it was a wonderful film. Good choice, Joe. And before I finish, Joe, can I just say, because I never did last year, thank you for the chocolate you sent me. Because I forgot to thank you for it. Them bloody double-decker and caramels were fantastic.
I think there may be a subtle hint there as well, Colin. That perhaps a second parcel may possibly wing its way over.
Lovely.
I'll get your address later.
Oh, will.
It's interesting. It's interesting what you were saying there about accents and things like that, because I saw, and I can't remember the name of it, but I saw a John Thor thing where he played
Story Now TV series.
Yeah, that's right. And the way it was done, the sort of the theatrical convention, because obviously it was made for a British audience. The German officers spoke in sort of received pronunciation, clipped British accents.
Yeah.
The locals all spoke, including him, all spoke in regional accents. And it actually worked really, really well. And a similar I was involved with the Roman film, The Eagle. And in that, the director, who was just, can't remember his name, but in that, he said all the Romans spoke with a strong American accent, and all the Brits spoke with regional British accents. And as a theatrical convention to show occupying forces, it worked really, really well. And similarly with what, I cannot bear the whole fake German accent thing. It just, unless you're doing it for pure comedy value. But I quite like that theatrical convention where all the German officers are speaking beautifully and all the locals are speaking with Yorkshire accents. It just sets a little bit of difference up. And that's actually but I quite, I do like it when the Germans speak German and the French speak French.
I watched Death of Stalin last week with Jason Isaacs playing Zhukov as a Yorkshireman, which just somehow worked. And Stalin is kind of like a northern drunk. Khrushchev really is Stephen Buscemi, so he's American, but Jason Isaacs isn't from Yorkshire. But he said, you can just imagine when they're doing the read through, Lance, and he goes, "Yes, I think I'm going to play Zhukov as Yorkshire." Yes, good idea. It would have sounded crazy, but on screen it works perfectly, doesn't it? It just works. It comes in right. Stalin's dead. It's just brilliant.
Right. The great thing about it is that immortal line: "Where the fucking hell can a war hero get a drink around here?" or something. I can't do Yorkshire.
To be fair to Jason Isaacs, I don't know how many of you have seen Star Trek Discovery here, but he played a baddie there, and he did this amazing fake Scottish accent, which has just made me laugh, really. But he does do a really good job with his accent. So
it was one of the few things that was any good about Star Trek Discovery.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, sadly.
I was at an event at the Curzon Soho with Armando Iannucci and Simon C. Bagmontefiore talking about the death of Stalin, and they'd been out for a few drinks before, so it was quite amusing. Apparently, Michael Palin walked past them in the curry house, put his face up against the window, and just sort of pretended to cry. But he said when he sent the script to Jason Isaacs, he got the tick from the DPD app. And he said about 20 minutes later, he had a text message saying, "I'll do it, but only if I do it Yorkshire." And he was like, "You're in, go for it." Because everybody was, he wanted this sort of malaise of lots of different accents. He was just like, Zhukov, Yorkshireman, totally works. And I love that film. I really, really do.
Quite an interesting demand for an actor to make. If I can do it in a Yorkshire accent, please. I've never heard that.
Right.
Well, that was a good choice, Joe. Thanks for doing that. You can relax now. That was your tough bit over. So well done, Joe. So who wants to go next? It's now Colin, Stephen, or me, isn't it, next?
No, it's Matt as well, but I'll go next
as well. Matt, yeah.
Thank you for remembering, Colin. It's very kind of
I forget you, Matt, because I've got a crush on you, and I can't bear to look at you because I get you when you're in my eye line. I get all girly. No, I'm joking.
I think I've got the longest film as well, so you can save me for later.
Okay, who wants to go next?
Okay. I'll go next.
Colin, so Colin, you're going to take us to Britain, aren't you, Colin?
I'm going to take you to Britain, yes, and the year 1942. Not only is it the year of the setting of the film, it's also the year the film was made, which in my opinion...
I love this movie.
Oh, yeah, well done.
Ooh,
it makes a choice. Brave choice to make this movie in 1942.
Yeah.
When things are still not going great for what is now the Allied forces, because America's joined the war. The Battle of Britain, of course, has been won, but the desert is still not going brilliantly for the British forces. And there's still that... threat that Britain could be invaded by the Germans. That threat has not gone away. And to make this movie, and there's reasons I hate this movie, but there's a lot of reasons why I love this movie as well. And it's my working class chip on my shoulder. That's why the bit I hate. But don't worry, I've got a chip on each shoulder that balances out. It is Middle England against the Nazis, basically. And you all know the story because everybody's seen The Eagle Has Landed, which is a direct bloody rip-off of this movie. But it is an incredibly brave film to make as a propaganda piece, I think. And I think that's why, for me, it stands the test of time. I mean, I have no idea who most of the actors in this movie were, except the Gloucestershire Regiment played all the troops involved, whether it be Germans, all the British forces who come in at the end, the cavalry. And if you watch it again and listen to the attack as the British forces come in at the end, they are whooping and hollering. They're having an absolute time of their lives making this movie, the Gloucesters. They really are in high spirits. And it's also very challenging movie to think in 1942. You don't have any of the tricks that, of course, you've got today with CGI. But the woman in the post office, if you remember that scene where she throws the pepper into the German soldier's eye, and then picks up the wood axe, and you never see it go in, but you know she's just killed that German with a wood axe to his head. And the realization of what she's done as you see the tears slide down her face, that was really, really, really controversial considering the year it was made. I just think it's a great film. Yes, there's bits of it because it's Middle England. Of course, the working class couldn't save Great Britain, could it? It's got to be the upper classes. But it is just a really brave film to make at the time it was made. And I think it stands the test of time. I've watched it twice in the last sort of 10 days, and I just absolutely love it. Absolutely love it.
Can I jump in with a film, with a location fact?
Yes, please.
So, yeah, okay. So that village is Hambledon, which is about a mile away from where I used to go every weekend. It is also Dawn French's church in Vicar of Dibley. It is also, yeah, it is. It is also John Thor's village in Goodnight, Mr. Tom. And it is also episode 1 of Band of Brothers, where they go to the to get the washing done. And it's their village, and it's where that's Hambledon. It's also up just down in the valley from Caractacus Potts' windmill in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and just round the corner from where Caractacus Potts puts Truly Scrumptious in the river in her little de Dion Bouton.
That has just made the show for me. You've managed to connect Went the Day Well to Chitty Chitty Bang Bang in a seamless maneuver there. I mean, just perfect. That is well done, Abs. That was awesome. It's
also been used in Doctor Who, and most recently the adaptation of Good Omens.
Oh, right, okay.
Oh, of course.
The people of Hambleton must be raking it in with all these.
Who is that town's agent?
I feel like
actually, let me jump in there. The whole village, I believe, is owned by the
it'll be one family, probably.
It is one family.
Classes for you.
Yeah, it's owned by one family, and if you paint your door the wrong color, you are out of that village. You will be ostracized because that village it makes a lot of money from its filming, and there are 2 routes around the village. So where the Band of Brothers garage, there's a scene in Band of Brothers where I think they come round a corner in episode 1, and there's what looks like an old kind of garage, which is indeed a garage, and that is one route through the village, and then you can go through the main route through the village, but you can get round the village, which is why it's so popular for filming. It's Hambledon in the Chilterns, just about 5 miles north of High Wycombe.
Right.
And, it's a fantastic place.
It's got a great pub.
Yeah.
It was called Bramley End in the movie.
It's got a great pub that you can't go to right now.
Yeah.
That's true.
You were talking about the cast, Colin. I think the only apart from Thora Hird kicking ass with the number 4 Lee Enfield out the window of the manor, the only thing I think
I am joking
is David Farrar, who of course was in Black Narcissus and various other classic Powell and Pressburger films. He plays the German second in command, Lieutenant Jung. I think that, but yeah, Thora Hird. Because as a kid, I'd only ever seen Thora Hird. What was that show she played, the Salvation Army thing? There was some show when I was a kid. I didn't know until and she was on that song, not Songs of Praise, the ITV one, wasn't she? The Praise Me or something? But anyway. Yeah. When I first saw Went the Day Well and saw Thora Hird felling Nazis with a number 4, it was like, bloody hell, Thora Hird kicking ass. Fantastic. So, yeah,
Terrific.
Went the Day Well, classic film.
Really.
Eagle Has Landed, also a brilliant film. And there's some debates on YouTube about whether Eagle Has Landed is a copy of Went the Day Well or not, because it is based on Jack Higgins' book. But Jack Higgins clearly takes a lot of inspiration from Went the Day Well. So,
Well,
I
When the Day Well, Graham Greene short story.
yeah, so it's Graham Greene, then movie, then Jack Higgins, then second movie. Yeah.
I think I agree with
Same way, it starts exactly the same with the grave of the Germans, and Eagle Has Landed starts exactly the same way. It is just lifted and modernized. That's all he's done, is just modernize the story by bringing the Germans over from the Channel Islands.
Right.
It is a direct.
Depending on which cut of the Eagle Has Landed you see, there's two different openings. There's an extended cut which has a completely different beginning for the film, and it's actually very good. And you get to see Adolf Hitler. And
can I also say,
worth checking out if you haven't seen that, guys.
Stephen's talking. Yeah.
Sorry, my apologies. I interrupted Lance. My apologies.
No, just a quick fact.
Probably the end of last year, I was in the Chilterns, because I used to live in that area quite a lot. And at Beaconscott's Model Village, which is not a million miles from Hambledon, there is a model church. And in the model church, model graveyard, is a small grave. And next to it is a little tiny 4-inch high Luftwaffe officer looking at the grave. And I am pretty convinced that that is a little nod to either the Eagle Has Landed or Went the Day Well. That somebody has said, I'm going to put that in my little village church. It's brilliant. I've got a photo of it. I'll send it to you, Paul.
You are definitely Mr. Trivia tonight, Stephen. That's your.
I don't think I can top that.
Yeah. I can't top. I think I agree with Colin. I've seen a lot of the wartime movies that were for propaganda, and most of them are complete rubbish, shall we say, or you can't not watch them with a straight face. But Colin's choice there, it's one I could happily watch again quite a few times, especially as someone that's used the Lee Enfield as well, that was trained on a Lee Enfield back in my cadet days. It's just one I can always enjoy watching.
A good movie.
Yeah, I agree. I only saw it about 10 years ago, actually, and I was amazed how well it still stands up.
Yeah. No, it's very well directed, very well paced. So, no, cracking film. I watched it, a couple of weeks ago, preparation for this. So, who's next? Is it Matt?
I'll go.
Yeah, do you want to go, Matt? So we're back to France again, aren't we?
Yes, we're back to France, and we're back to France for a long time, because I've gone for Melville's Army of Shadows, which is it's funny. It sticks in my head as being this stunning thing, and I watched it again last night for this, and it is. But what strikes me is he manages to keep the tension up for nearly 3 hours when nothing really happens. It comes, you have scenes of Vincent Caussel's dad there being chained to a chair, but it's very much sort of decision and reaction. There's the bit in the middle where there would normally be all the explosions and things. Doesn't happen. It's very much the sort of the management of the resistance, and I absolutely love it. And I came to it after first seeing Le Samurai in a college film club and seeing what else was there for us. And it's just this incredible slow burn of sort of action reactions and build up to very few set pieces. But the thing that comes across incredibly well is that it's the French at the fore. The Germans that are in it are, other than the marching around the Arc de Triomphe at the beginning, they're not really in it very much. You have the famous scene where his name's gone straight in my head. Guibert has to run away from the machine guns and things, but it's very focused on how the resistance was managed, and the fact of it is, I think it's better for it. It's there's a lot of modern films that we've talked about are very much about the blowing up of the telephone poles, the cutting of the railway lines, but in this you have the decision making that goes to it, and the whole film sort of hinges around this incredible character played by Simone Sigart, who's just wonderful. And Les Darbalique, and I apologize for my French accent as I am from the wrong side of Canada. There is an excellent joke about Canadians speaking French in the film as well, but there's that's just an aside. But what you basically have is you have Felix Guibert, played by the wonderful Lino Ventura. He opens up by being caught and put into an internment camp, and it sort of follows his sort of resistance cells in Marseille and Lyon, as he's basically managing the escape of Allied personnel, but also the sort of the keeping of the fight going. And it's incredibly slow burn, but there's little moments in it that just cause things to sort of boil over. The scene when they're getting the Allied personnel and the big boss out, and the submarine bubbles up from underneath on the edge of the bay, which interestingly, if you go to Saint-Nazaire, you can go on one of those exact Norway class submarines as well. But it's the way the film is put together is fascinating. You take the sort of Melville's realism, the way he holds his camera, everything is slightly set in a way to keep you off guard. And I'm being poured more wine. Thank you, my love.
Is that a butler coming in with a tray of alcohol?
Jeeves there. Jeeves came in.
It's my wonderful wife, who I would never call a butler in a million years.
I have to say, Matt, I don't interrupt you, but I did love in your Twitter message yesterday your description of Army of Shadows to Wendy when you said it's very French, it's very 70s. Because to me, that should be its tagline. Forget about this, resistance, betrayal. It should be very French, very 70s, because it is very French, very 70s. I love it. I'm with you, Matt. I do find my finger kind of hovers over the fast forward, because there's an awful lot of going upstairs, going downstairs, opening doors, closing doors, getting in cars, getting out of cars, getting in cars again, going up steps, going out, closing doors, opening doors, waiting for the phone to ring, closing the door, opening the door, meeting someone outside the door, going through the door. And that kind of, you kind of go, it's the opposite of Female Agents, where there's like non-stop action and drama and chases and Germans. And they're the opposite ends, I think, of French filmmaking. Like action. The Army of Shadows is like those films that Mag watches. She can't hear me. Where there's people sitting on the beds going, pourquoi non? That kind of the cigarette kind of bah oui, bah non, for like an hour. That it goes a bit down that way.
I think if you ever want to learn how to make a film of people smoking, this is the film to watch. Because it's everybody has their own style for lighting a cigarette. It's absolutely fantastic. I love it because it's there's the great scene at the chateau when the fake Lysanders are coming in, which for the playing keeps, I think they're Broussards they're using it. But you have this one Lysander flying around and then the other one landing, people getting in, people getting out. You're thinking, right, something's going to happen, and nothing does. It is the most wonderful, wonderful French film of its time. And because of, I think what's equally interesting is that because of one scene with a very, very bad De Gaulle impersonator, the film came out in 1969, which was in the summer after the summer of '68, and the public turned on it because it was seen as being Gaullist propaganda. Which you could read it that way. But if it was Gaullist propaganda, they didn't get up to much except sort of, getting caught basically and killing their own. But because of that, it's interesting. You sort of, I was reading some of the reviews of the time, and it got panned so much so that the American buyers, when they were reading these reviews, they didn't buy it. So it didn't get shown in the States for 40 years. And when it did, it was fawned over. If you sort of go online to Roger Ebert's archive, his review of it, which just goes on almost as long as the film, actually. But it's fascinating to see how it's grown, but how it was completely disregarded at the time. So much that, you know, I think Melville even had a bit of trouble getting his next film financed, which was finishing off that gangster trilogy that La Samurai sits in the middle. I love it because it is about the most French thing you can do for nearly 3 hours on a Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, who else has seen it here? Who else has seen Army of Shadows? Colin,
I don't know how he makes it thrilling.
I don't remember
that long with nothing happening. It's brilliant. I love it.
I mean, maybe because it wasn't successful at the beginning. At
well.
least the Americans didn't rip it apart and make like an 80-minute TV movie version, which they had a tendency to do. Like we talked about First of a Few on the History Hack, didn't we? And that was ripped by the Americans. So maybe they'd have taken all, because the set pieces. You're right. The set pieces are really good, but in between the set pieces, there is this lots of smoking, lots of steps and doorways, and. You're right. If you cut that out, it isn't half the movie. I mean, I don't mean literally. I mean figuratively. You need that. You need that slow burn. You need that justification to get to where you went. But it's a tough watch now. I mean, I feel the same way. I'm gonna piss people off. I love Lawrence of Arabia, but the whole long, nearly 3.5 hour director's cut. It is. You know, you do kind of have you welcome that break halfway through and go yeah, because it's a lot of brilliant movie making, but it is very long. But I'm not knocking Lawrence of Arabia, but some of those long we're just not used to long films now, are we? We like our 90-minute. But anyway, so Shadow.
Joe, it's kind of like the length of Das Boot.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, at least Das Boot, you know, when you're in the submarine, you get depth charged every 10 minutes.
Less doors in a submarine, not the door open and close.
And less decent smoking.
Less smoking.
But it's funny that you mentioned the smoking. There was a lot of smoking in female agents as well. But one of the scenes that stuck out to me was there was quite a tense scene where one of the agents, Gael, was waiting for this SS colonel in a hotel room, and she lights a cigarette looking out the window. She actually burns herself. The actress burns herself on the lighter. She can't close it and burns her thumb, but just carries on straight through it. And I thought that added to the tension of the scene.
That's the craft, Joe. That's the craft.
Yeah. I thought that was quite funny.
There's dedication to the role.
Yeah. Leonardo DiCaprio in Django Unchained.
Django,
yeah, when he cuts himself.
Smashes.
We're going for the tangent now, aren't we?
So, I've not watched this movie that Matt's mentioned, but the comparison that I can think of that I've watched recently came out this year actually. It's just called Resistance, about the life of I think it's Marcel Marliot, the mime.
Yeah, I've seen that, the one where he rescues all the children.
Yeah,
the Jewish children that got to persuade him to be Christian, sort of thing. Yeah.
That was not a bad film. I don't know how accurate it was, but it had really nice production design.
It did,
and the location work was really beautiful and really nice stuff going on.
Haven't seen it yet.
On the subject of production design, in first lockdown in Paris. And I wish I could show you the pictures, but unfortunately I can't. They were using a particular street in Paris that's comes down a little. Again, it's a cut through, so it's a street that can be cut off. And the production designers shooting a World War II film there. This was in early March, and they put period frontages on all of these houses, and it looked phenomenal. Because I'm doing a design job for somebody at the moment, and we're basically nicking the design of these buildings. And then lockdown happened in Paris, and they couldn't do any more with the filming. And these people were parking their, chaining their mopeds to the wooden buildings and living behind these wonderful 1940s facades for 3 or 4 months during first lockdown in Paris, and just having to live in this fantastic World War II film set that looked phenomenal. And I presume the film has now happened and it's all been taken away, but it looked absolutely brilliant. Again, I'll send you some pictures, Paul, of what it looked like.
I remember seeing your photos on Facebook. They were great. Yeah. Or you posted them from a newspaper. They were great. Yeah. So with that, we might as well do your choice now, Stephen. We'll go to Britain again. Well, Britain and France. Yes. Another wartime film.
It is. Well, this actually it's a film set in 1943. And we have had, there we go, School for Danger. It is a phenomenal.
I've not seen this one.
This is bloody marvelous. This is the original brilliant film about SOE. And why is it brilliant? Because everybody in it is the real deal. This is not actors. This is people who do things for real. So the guy in the with the pistol shooting over his shoulder, this guy is a man called Harry Ree, who was a grammar school teacher from Bradford. The woman is a woman called Jacqueline Neen, and together, these people in the movie, which was made in 1947, they are preparing for D-Day. Now, if you watch this on YouTube, a lot of people sit there and say they are not very good at acting. Well, A, they are, and B, acting wasn't their speciality. Killing Germans on active service in France was their speciality. And they really are phenomenal. Now, what I like about this film, I'm just going to let it roll in the background. If you can see on the screen behind me, that is Baker Street, where F Section SOE had their base. In the film, Jacqueline Neen, she's going into SOE offices, and the whole thing has been recreated for the film. They go through their entire training. You see the whole of an SOE training operation. The whole thing it is absolutely phenomenal the way it's been done. And what I like about Harry Ree, the guy who is the real agent, who plays this agent called Felix, not his original operational name when he was in France. He's just my kind of SOE agent. He can't speak French very well. In fact, in his own autobiography, he says, when I landed in France, I decided to go for a haircut. So I went to a barber's, and I went into this barber, and the guy just talked at me for ages. I didn't really understand anything he was saying. So I just said, oui, most of the time, and I seemed to get away with it. So this man is an operational SOE agent who can't speak French very well, which is just brilliant in itself. Now, when in the film, they go through the entire SOE training operation. You see them going through the parachute training school at Ringway. You see them with doing small arms training. You see them doing explosives training. And it's all done with the original people who were doing it with them originally during the war. They then go to 138 Squadron RAF Tempsford, which is just off the A1, where Halifax is with all these little parachute drops on the sides, painted on the sides. So it's Special Operation Mark 1, Mark 2 Halifaxes. They then parachute out using X-type parachutes, which of course are commonly available at the time. They land in France. They're wearing striptease suits. They've got their spades. They bury their chutes. It is textbook SOE operation. All the Frenchmen speak French. The whole thing is subtitled. And then it's just a phenomenal film. Phenomenal film, about an hour long. It's on YouTube, School for Danger. What I also like about Harry Ree is that he bites the nose off a German Feldgendarme in a fight. Now, I had to check this.
Did he do it for real?
Yeah, for real.
He wasn't an actor, so did he do it for real?
He did do it for real. Yeah, this is actually in the real war. So, there he is there, handsome fellow. He's about 29, 30 years old. Basically, when he was on proper SOE operations, Harry Ree in France got into a scrape with the German Feldgendarme. So he starts fighting with the Feldgendarme, who pulled out his Luger, shot Harry Ree 4 times. 1 bullet went through the lung, went through the leg, 2 more grazed his arm. He said, I didn't actually feel the bullets go through, presumably because he's hyped on adrenaline. So now he's in this fight with this German. He put his thumb in the German Feldgendarme's eye and tried to gouge his eye out. It didn't work. So now he bit the guy's nose as hard as he could to try to bite the guy's nose off. Didn't work. Put his thumb in his mouth and tried to yank his mouth open and rip it. Didn't work. So then he punched the German twice so hard that he knocked him into the wall, at which point the German Feldgendarme must have just thought, bugger this guy's too hard for me. So as is reported in Harry Ree's autobiography, he then just went, this is the German, just go away now, leave me alone. So Harry Ree then left, swam a river with a hole in his lung and a hole in his leg and got away. So the German just said, right, I've had enough, you can go. You're too tough for me. What I also like about Harry Ree, the agent in this film, the guy you see just behind me there, what I like about him also is he didn't like the way that the RAF were missing targets. So in the area that he was deployed in France, he found a Peugeot. There was a Peugeot factory that was making tank turrets for Panzer IIIs, which was obviously a very rich target for the RAF. However, it was in the middle of a residential area. So Ree, through his S phone and his Eureka set, persuaded the British not to bomb the factory, because he knew that the French people in the area would also suffer collateral damage. So he then, getting together with his agents that he was controlling in France, he then managed to destroy the factory again and again and again and again and again, until the turret manufacture of these Panzer III turrets was substantially degraded. So Harry Ree, what a guy. Amazing chap. And I would recommend anybody watch School for Danger. If you think it's going to suffer from the Theirs Is the Glory acting problems, it doesn't. They are all really, really good at, well, acting, because presumably that's what these guys had to do, and they had to be able to play a role. So it is the original film of SOE training. It's all filmed on location. For detail about the operations of F Section SOE, I don't think you can fault it. School for Danger gets my vote every time. So that's my take on it. It really is.
Yeah, it is.
Cracking film.
Buckmeister was involved with the film, wasn't he? Morris Buckmeister, who was
yes, indeed, absolutely,
the head of F Section. He was involved, and isn't the tagline for that film "Now Their Story Can Be Told"?
That's the American title. It's got two titles. So yeah, now
Jacqueline, yeah, Jacqueline Nairn, her sister was also in the SOE F Section as well, Dee Dee, who was the lady, the cat lady in somewhere in Devon, who was found dead, and that's why the story of the Nairn sisters came out.
Yeah,
that's both been SOE.
She was caught and tortured by the Gestapo, and her sister, the one in this film, looked after her for most of her life. Because she was suffering from PTSD after her wartime.
She was at Ravensbrück for a while, and finally her, the girl from the Chateau Arguge, no, not Chateau Arguge, Chateau Audrieux in Bayeux, who after witnessing SS executions at the chateau where she lived, volunteered for SOE and was parachute behind lines. She was taken prisoner, and another British agent, and the three of them managed to escape when they were being marched out of whichever camp they were in at the time, and made their way back to the American lines, and were taken over by the Americans in 45. But yeah, the Nairn sister story is an incredible story. I can't remember the name of the book. It's very good.
For sheer detail, this movie is brilliant, and I've been dipping into it for some. Because I've managed to secure the use of the interior of a Halifax for something I'm trying to make, and I'm trying to get the whole kind of drop sequence of an agent being inserted into France from a Halifax. So I've created like miniature Halifax shots for my green screen elements and all of that. And you get to this point of where you sit there and you go, I just can't fault this stuff. I mean, it is just fantastic. We're seeing here British labels being taken out of clothing and French labels being sewn in. We go through the whole kind of process, and everybody in it, including the pilot who inserts them into France, they are all the original deal. And I know exactly what you say, Paul, about, you know, Theirs Is the Glory and some of the dodgy acting. I think you get Freddie Goff, I think, isn't it, in Theirs Is the Glory, and he's shocking. But then you're not employing these people because they are, you know, good actors. That said, I think that lad who stands up in Oosterbeek in Theirs Is the Glory and he says, that sounds like armour. That sort of handsome lad who's standing up in the slit trench. I think he's a good actor, and I think he could have had a career as an actor after the war. But yeah, it often is the case with these movies that these people are not the strongest actors. But I can't.
Not in that case, though.
No. This is a crackingly good film, and I think this guy, after all of his shenanigans in the war, went off to become head of York Chorister School. So he just went back into a very quiet life after the war. So yeah, I can't fault this one. So if anybody
still have the Feldgendarmerie guy's nose in his pocket as a lucky trinket, was that did he keep that like
a chain around his neck, dangling?
Oh, that's the German's nose I bit off. Yeah, back in 43. Yes. Your story about the French factory, though, Abs, it reminded me of a story. Alex Scott, you know Alex, Steve.
Yeah. I saw Alex.
About Alex is for those who don't know, Alex restores old cars, Humbers and Morrises and stuff like that. And he bought a car from France, and he told me a great story, which he told Colin as well, about, and I forget whether it was Peugeot, Renault, or Citroën, but it's one of the French manufacturers. A factory was taken over by the Germans, and to sabotage it, the clever thing the French did is they changed where they stamped the markings on the dipsticks for the oil on the engine, and they gave them to Germans with the mark at the wrong place. So when the Germans had these cars in their use and they would check the oil, the dipstick told them it was full of oil, but it wasn't. It was only half full of oil. And what happened is loads and loads of these cars then seized up under German use because they didn't have enough oil in. And that struck me as being a really clever way of sabotaging something without going and blowing shit up. Just
absolutely. But Paul, that's exactly the same as the characters that my colleague Alex, and I do in our story Engines and Espionage. So Robert Benoit and Willie Grover, our two characters that we feature, they get a job at the Citroën factory on the banks of the Seine in Paris. And their job is both SOE agents, obviously, and they replace all the grease in the stores with high abrasive grease flown in by SOE. So all of the grease that Citroën are now putting onto Citroën products that they're making for the Germans has got this abrasive agent built into it. So it's really subtle work. And actually, both Benoit and Willie Grover, Williams, Willie Grover, whatever name you want to call him, theirs is not blowing up telegraph poles. They turn away from being in gunfights with the Germans because it's too damn obvious. What they do is they observe in the Rue Avenue Foch. They look at the SS headquarters. They are constantly watching, and they are just observation people as well as very subtle saboteurs. And it's a brilliant story. Theirs is a brilliant story, and one I absolutely adore. That's another one.
One of the movies I could have chosen this, but I can't because I'm not going to yet. Is A Call to Spy, and the reason I didn't choose it is I'm interviewing the screenwriter and one of the actors from it next week, Sarah Megan Thomas, who was in it. And A Call to Spy is about Virginia Hall and other real, Morris Buckmaster's in it, what have you. And Mag and I watched it last week, and the interesting thing about that is there aren't many. There's one train derailment, but most of it is doing what SOE actually did, which is just keeping an eye on things, sending messages, keeping an eye on things, moving from one place to another. And there aren't any false heroics and drama in it. They just do what their job was, which was just sending back information. You're kind of watching it from this modern point of view, expecting them to go and have this big confrontation with a Gestapo officer, and none of that happens because, of course, it's based on reality. And I think there are not enough movies that actually talk about the banality, if you like, of most behind the lines operations, which are very subtle. And I think that kind of things, Abs, about just adding abrasive grease is as important to the war effort as blowing up a bridge. Well, I'll bring you in because we do talk too much about the sexy stuff, not enough about the day-to-day work of agents. And so, what's your feeling about that, Paul?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is the thing, but people believe the SAS its job is to go around and shoot people. Most of the special forces stuff is really boring. You insert them somewhere, they go and take a look, you pick them up, they come back. It's dodgy while they're out there because they don't want to get caught. But actually, they're not shooting people. They're just observing. It's this, and a lot of the SOE stuff is the same. I mean, there were 470 members of F section of SOE. A lot of what they did was not the big hero stuff. It was just standard routine reporting, which it was all part of building up the intelligence picture. But then you get really subtle things. I think French railway locomotives, you could put a 10 centime piece somewhere in the workings, and that would degrade the locomotive so it stops. That's what you want to do. You want to stop it so it cannot be traced back, so you can't take reprisals against the locals. Listen, guys, I'm really sorry. I have to disappear now.
Okay, no problem, Paul. Thanks very much for joining us.
I need to say how much I enjoyed this. It was really.
And we'll bring you on
really
again
good.
to talk about the stuff you've been involved in, because you've been involved in Skyfall and all sorts of stuff. So we'll bring you back in the future. But anyway, thanks for joining us, Paul. And
great to see you,
speak
Paul.
again. Cheers, Paul. Thanks.
Really nice to meet everybody, and stay safe. And we'll see you soon, I hope. Thanks a million.
Paul.
Bye, Paul.
Yeah,
See you,
I mean
Paul.
that scene that Paul mentioned there about the coin, that's in the train with Burt Lancaster.
Oh, well,
Indeed, in the train.
Thank you. I was trying to remember the movie.
Great
Yeah.
film.
I
See you
was
later,
going to
guys.
mention
See you, Paul. Yeah,
Bye.
so great stuff.
the train, phenomenal film. John
yeah,
Frank
brilliant
and
film.
Yeah, I nearly picked the train as my choice, actually, but I thought somebody else would pick it. So
really bold use of camera angles with Paul Schofield right in the foreground, and that big scene at the end where there's the German officer and you got Schofield's face there, and then you've got the German, and it's all tiered in the way the scenes are shot. I love Frankenheimer stuff, and it's a phenomenal film. Brilliant film.
Well, we could
Brilliant.
easily do a second show of this, because there's some great films. Eye of the Needle didn't come up. Carver Named with Pride. No one went for that in the end. Charlotte Gray. There's easily a second part of this if we wanted to do that. But I guess I'll do my choice now, and then we'll let Lance. Unless you have to go, Lance, I want you to talk about what your film projects are yourself, Lance.
well,
Tell you what, you do your bit now, Lance, then I'll do mine. Okay,
okay.
just tell us about, because those of you watching, the Lance was involved in well, I'll let him talk, but the various projects about the 6th Airborne. So, Lance, tell us where you are with getting the British Paras on film, because it's a fascinating story.
In case you can't guess from behind me, I'm a big World War II buff. Have been since like I said, since I watched The Longest Day, which is I think the first war movie I saw. About 5 years of age, and then I eventually went into film production. I was an actor originally, and I wanted to do. I always wanted to do a historical film, and the one I always wanted to do was Pegasus Bridge, and we were gearing up to shoot that. We shot a trailer for it in 2015. We got some development money. And it looked like it was going to happen. We actually had all the locations booked, and we'd started casting, and it was going really well. And then a couple of things happened. One of them was Brexit, which sank one of our investors, and they pulled out, and that led to a lot of problems. And then also we were just really, we had some producers we hadn't worked with before, and they were just not the right people. I won't get into why, but they just weren't the right people. So
you're poorest there.
The Pegasus Bridge didn't happen, and that was, I've got to tell you, that was really absolutely soul destroying for me personally, because not only was I massively emotionally invested in it, and I worked on it pretty much full time for 3 years, but I also became friends with all the veterans that were still alive, and they were popping off every few months at that point. So, and every time we would interview one of them, and you got anything else you want to say, the last thing they'd say to me is, bloody hurry up, because I want to be alive to see the film. So, and then it got postponed, and it got postponed again. And then we realized it just wasn't going to happen, at least not with those people involved. And I didn't get the rights back to the movie in its entirety until November 2019. So once it was sort of clear that it wasn't really in my hands anymore, I was so frustrated. That was how Paratrooper came about, which I can talk about a bit more freely. So Paratrooper is a European version of Band of Brothers. I've got the pitch pack for it right here. And so this is the pitch pack for the TV show. We've shot about 17 minutes of the pilot. We crowdfunded some money. I have an absolutely amazing cast attached to the film. We're still recruiting more. This is some of the cast who are attached. You'll recognise a few of those faces from various television shows. Phil Davis there. Jason Fleming is in pretty much everything I direct. He was in my last 2 films, and he's attached to do 2 more. I've got Sharon Duncan Brewster, who's in June on that side there. and the pilot of Paratrooper is about the first black paratrooper in the British Army. And so when we were sort of saying we were going to do this, it was quite interesting that lots of armchair historians were jumping on our forum and going, there weren't any black paratroopers in the British Army. Actually, there were quite a few. There was quite a few in the 6th Airborne Division alone. And you can see photographs of them. It's pretty easy to find pictures of them. Sidney Cornell was the battalion boxing champion. So the more I dug into him, the more interesting his story became. And actually, how I found out about him was when I was researching to do the script for Pegasus Bridge, which I wrote. And I knew a lot about Pegasus Bridge already. I'd researched it to bits way before I wrote the script, but I didn't know that there was a black paratrooper in the 7th Battalion. They were the guys who landed an hour after the gliders, and they reinforced the bridge, and they went over to the western perimeter, and they were fighting in the village there in Lacombe. And their job was basically to keep the Germans away from the bridge. And in fact, we filmed one of those battles for the pilot. I've got some stills of it here, which I'll show you in a sec. And that sequence, there was a guy called Michael McGee who charged a tank with a Bren gun. And that still there is from that sequence. And we shot that sequence for about 11 grand. So I'm quite a resourceful filmmaker. I'm pretty good at getting stuff together for not a lot. I mean, obviously, you want to shoot things so that they look good and are historically accurate. So don't get me wrong, I wasn't looking to cut corners. But we had to show people we could do it for the budget that we wanted. So we prepped all of that, and we shot a trailer for that, and we went around sort of cup in hand trying to find money. But Paratrooper is not like Band of Brothers in the sense that it doesn't follow one unit all the way through the war. Sidney Cornell's story is the pilot. He turns up in 2 other episodes, and so we do see him. But we've got a Polish episode, which is all about the Polish at Arnhem. We've got an Arnhem episode, but told from the Dutch civilians' point of view. So that's never been done before. And in fact, the main character in that is a 9-year-old Dutch kid. And the reason I chose to do it from that perspective was so that with this kid being fictional and he's trying to get back home during the battle, I could put him anywhere in the battle that I wanted, so that I could show the audience the scenes of the Battle of Arnhem that are not in Bridge Too Far, that we haven't seen before, like the decimation of the, I think it was the Dorsets trying to get to the bridge on the 3rd day on the River Road, and the fog bank lifted, the morning mist lifted, and the Germans that were in the factory on the other side of the river just massacred them, mowed them all down. And we did some test shooting for that right after we shot the battle scene for the pilot. We took a load of the crew and we went over to Holland, and we were doing some test shots for that. So that sequence of them trying to get near the bridge, that was a still. I was just trying to work out what the camera angles were that we could film, where there weren't too many modernisms and things like that. It was all just test footage. But that was actually filmed in Deventer, where they shot Bridge Too Far, because Deventer is a lot easier to film in than Arnhem. It's got a lot of really nice, beautiful original streets with a lot of the original buildings and architecture. And then in Paratrooper, another episode is called The Other Side. And that's, if you imagine you're watching Band of Brothers, but suddenly the opening sequence is like the same music, but it's all German iconography. Well, that's what we would do with Paratrooper, and suddenly you're in a German episode and you're following Fallschirmjäger, a young guy who's going into the Battle of Crete, and you're with him for the whole episode. So we wanted to do something that was going to be really educational and really informative about a lot of perspectives of airborne forces that had never been told before. But we didn't just want to do we didn't just want to do a British Band of Brothers. I don't think that would have worked. There isn't one airborne unit that fought in all the interesting battles or theatre of war. One was in Normandy, one was in Arnhem, one was in Sicily, one was in Africa, and so on. They all did different things. So to make it a bit different, I thought, well, we'll have some recurring characters that turn up in different episodes. We'll focus on one character in particular for each episode. And in each episode, we'll focus on a different battle. I've even got an episode in the show, which it would be interesting to hear Joe's opinion on, where the entire cast are women. And that episode is what's called a funding saving episode in the show. And it's basically, it's called Letters Home. And the entire episode is all, so this is like each episode's got a different pitch, sort of synopsis. And it's all set on the home front with the women receiving letters. And we see one of the characters in the episode before that writing a letter to his sweetheart just before he goes into battle. And we know he gets killed. And then in this episode, she's receiving the first letter thinking he's still alive. And the second letter telling her that he's dead arrives later the same day. So all the women kind of rally around her, and it's almost like watching the first support group of its kind take form. And this is all based on stuff that really happened. And Cornell's wife, who's the black paratrooper, is visiting her cousin in that village that day. So we have a load of things that tie into other stories.
Well, we're going to have to bring you in on a show in the future, Lance, because all this stuff is worth talking about. And I know I'm speaking for Colin and Matt and Steve and everybody watching. The minute there's a series about British airborne and German airborne, we're all going to buy into it, because, we love Band of Brothers. Sure, it was great, but everyone keeps saying, why aren't we doing something about the British? Why can't we tell some other stories? The Poles, Arnhem, and so I think on behalf of all of us, we wish you well with that and hope it bloody happens, because it should do it. It absolutely should. It's just a tragedy that there isn't money being thrown at you to do it, frankly, because they could. How many more remakes of Spider-Man and Batman and that do we need? And I don't like those films, but
Can I just say, Lance, I chipped in. I gave money to your crowdfunding.
Oh, thank you so much. And
much, but it was all I could spare at the time.
No, well, we
worthwhile project.
If we'd raised, I think we tried to raise 250 grand to do the pilot, and if we had, which by the way was the absolute minimum to shoot it with, but then that was paying everybody's scale. People would be the low end people would have been on 100 quid a day, and I think the top end people might have been on 175, maybe 200 for the DOP. It was really, really super tight budget, but we knew we could do a good job. But I wasn't going to go and try and shoot it for like 50 grand or something. So we just thought, well, let's see how much we can raise. What we'll do is, we had these 2 tanks and they were period correct, and they were being sold to the States a couple of weeks later. So we thought, right, we'll shoot that tank battle scene and we'll cast the people for that scene and we'll get it done. And we found a village, not Hambleton in the UK, but we found a village dubbed for a village in Normandy. But all of the rest of the Normandy scenes are all being shot in Normandy. And where this is at now is I'm working on another television series. It's not historical. It's completely unrelated. But a load of the people that are working on that show were in Band of Brothers. And they're now at the age where they're now all directors and producers and stuff like that. And I'm hoping that the other show that we're going to do with these guys, and these are serious, experienced guys, they know what they're doing. I'm hoping that I'll be able to take this as a project to them. And it might be something else that they'll want to do after the thing we're doing together. So I'm really passionate about this thing, in case you haven't picked up on that. And, when Pegasus didn't happen, I thought, right, what can we do that will be good but isn't as expensive? And that was the next thing we came up with. But it was the timing was just terrible, because Brexit then happened and no one had any money. And, it was great that people like Colin chipped in, and we made that money go really far. I think we raised about 15 grand. And at one point somebody said, oh, they ran off with all the money. And it's like, well, it cost us 11 grand just to shoot that one battle scene, £3,000 to fulfill all our perks. Where do you think I'm going to run off to for £1,000? And that went on the trip to Holland. So it all got spent on the show. No one went and bought an Xbox or anything,
The trouble is, isn't it, with the film industry, people think that every bloody reenactor thinks they can make a movie. And that's the trouble, because they think, oh, I could have done that, because they've all pointed their camera phone at their mate in a slip trench at the Victory show, and they all think that then that's how you make a movie. And actually, you know, I've worked in big film as a designer, and I was on set with Warhorse, Spielberg's Warhorse, and you watch 100 people standing behind the camera, and you think it can't take 100 people to make this scene. And then bit by bit you break down that scene, and you realize why there are 100 people there. It's so that scene could happen. And unfortunately, your average reenactor doesn't have a clue about how films get made. And I had this with a very, very minor thing I once made for the Royal Armouries in Fareham. And a bunch of reenactors just went, oh, it's a bit over dramatic, mate. And it's like, well, actually what that is what the client wanted. And it is soul destroying when you're trying, as you are, Lance, to make something that's got real soul to it. And then you get the bottom kicked out of you again and again and again by, as you say.
I'm not worried about comments from people online, to be honest, because I know my history. And I mean, to give you an idea of the detail we went into, I know that the attack that happened, the tanks that were coming at Pegasus Bridge that got stopped, that McGee charged, I know that one of them was a Panzer IV. There are no working Panzer IVs in the UK, but we do know that the infantry battalion that was defending that area, we know that they had a platoon of Stugs. I don't think they were the ones that directly attacked the bridge, but they were in the area. So we got the next best thing, which was tanks that were in the area, maybe not the ones that came down that particular road, but they were period correct. We even made sure, there's a picture of it in here somewhere, we made sure we painted up the right emblems for that battalion on the back of those particular tanks. And I mean, if the American guy who bought the tanks hasn't repainted them, that little emblem will still be on the back of them. And we had them repainted for the tank battle as well. If I find that picture, I'll show it to you. But, you know, the little kind of key thing that was on the back, all of that stuff, you have to get a balance at the end of the day. You're never going to be able, there it is, that symbol on the back there. And there was one thing that one of the comments was that the paratroopers were too clean, and that the tanks were too clean. Well, this is the first battle that happened with those vehicles, and contrary to popular opinion, Germans didn't go around caking their tanks in mud in peacetime when they were sitting happily in France, drinking wine and eating cheese. Most of them were just sitting on their asses, not doing a lot. And this was not a premium battalion. These were not SS. So there were units of 21st Panzer mixed in with regular German infantry. And all of the British paratroopers that dropped into Normandy on D-Day were all issued completely new uniforms and completely new kit. I think about 48 hours before the drop. So their kit wasn't worn on the day that they dropped in. All the stuff that happened to the paratrooper pilot is in like the first 6 hours. Yeah,
if you're doing a movie set in late July in Normandy, sure, their uniforms are going to be shagged.
Or even a few days, even 48 hours later, they will probably, you know, all be covered in shit. But this was like literally, they've just arrived. So unless they landed in the swamp, which my guys didn't.
Well, I think in terms of time, we'll bring you on again for something separate, Lance. And
sorry, that took up too much time.
I want to do my film now, because then I can because it's my turn now. It's my show. It's my turn. And I just want to
jump in
thank you
before Lance goes. Is there anything we can do to help, Lance?
Yeah, good point.
Listen, at the minute, guys, we're not going to go the crowdfunding route just to round that off again. Maybe we will if all else fails, but I'm going to see if I can have a word with these guys. And right before lockdown happened, we had somebody who was interested in funding it, and they wanted all the budgets, and that was all going on. And then lockdown happened, and boom. That maybe that's a conversation for further in the future. I'd like to see if we can get proper funding for it first, because that's what it deserves, and then we can give you all the show that you want and that you deserve. And thank you to Paul for letting me mention it in such great detail and
Oh, it's great. We're people
Can
are
I
interested.
can I just say, Paul, I wish you all the luck in the world with it, Lance. And it's not the film that we deserve. It's the film that they deserve.
Thank you. Yeah. The collective we, I suppose, what I meant. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's really, the reason that we like well-made movies in this period is not just that they're gripping and that they're thrilling and they're enthralling to watch. We need to engage the young and tell them about these stories, because I chat to like 20-year-old actors, 25-year-old actors and say, oh, you've seen Bridge Too Far, right? They've never even heard of it. They haven't watched it. And I sort of like despair. I'm like, that's a must watch, mate. You've got to, even just as an actor, even if you're not interested in history, you've got
even
to
just one-liners.
Yeah, so
one-liners and just, I mean,
it's about passing the stories on to the next generation, because if we don't keep doing that, the sacrifices and the level of appreciation that people have for the lives they have now will be completely lost on the younger generations. And you know what will happen then? They will make the same mistakes, because if you don't learn from the mistakes made in history, as the saying goes, you're destined to repeat those mistakes. And that's why I think historical films are so important, and we should continue to make them.
I got an email the other day saying, why are you talking about World War II movies on what you purport to be a World War II history channel, Mr. Woodadge? This email said, why are you discussing war movies? And you just reply, because they're seen by millions and sometimes billions, and dismissing them is ridiculous. I mean, sure, there are brilliant books about World War II, and Peter Caddick Adams and John McManus and all those guys are doing incredible work, and Alex Kershaw, but books reach an audience of this size. Movies reach an audience of, and I can't get my hands wide enough, because that's the fact. Band of Brothers, Saving Private Ryan, Dunkirk, War Horse, 1917 reach audiences that books will never reach, rightly or wrongly. I mean, let's not get into writing as an art form and movies as an art form, but movies are so incredibly important, as I should point out are graphic novels and comics, and also video games, and also toys and model making, and all those other areas that anything that attempts to portray history is worth embracing and not dismissing. That's my off my soapbox now. But anyway, I'm going to do my film now. And I changed my mind, by the way, today, folks. I had originally decided to do Orders to Kill, a rather obscure 1958 film about an agent going into France to knock off a supposed collaborator. And I changed my mind at last minute today, and I decided to go with Operation Crossbow, the 1965 classic with George Peppard, Sophia Loren, Trevor Howard.
Can you get some air quotes around classic?
Brilliant
it's a flawed movie. I'll talk about. I mean, it was directed by Michael Anderson, who famously brought us the Dam Busters and Yangtze Incident and Around the World in 80 Days and the incredible Cold War thriller Quiller Memorandum with George Segal and Max von Sydow. But I know Operation Crossbow isn't the best movie, and it was badly sold in America as the great spy mission, where they were trying to cash in on the success of Bond and Goldfinger and Thunderball and what have you. The things I like about it, the first thing is I love how it tells the point of view of the development of the V1 weapons, with the test pilot there, and the Peenemünde, and just what the Germans are trying to do with V weapons. I like the fact it does that. And Colin, yes, the Germans speak Germans, the French speak French, the Dutch speak Dutch, and the Belgians and they speak Flemish. So I like the fact it has the German side of things.
French Belgians.
Yeah. So it's not a perfect movie. George Peppard as the lead, he was good in the Blue Max, but in Operation Crossbow, you get the sense he's going through the motions. But making up for George Peppard, Jeremy Kemp is superb in it. And Tom Courtenay is brilliant in it as well, I think. And there's some great actors lower down the bill. John Mills in it for a small role. Richard Todd is in it. Sylvia Sims. Richard Johnson, who plays Duncan Sandys, the real minister under Churchill, is good. Although apparently half his scenes were cut. There was a lot more of the politics behind it that were shot that didn't actually made the cut, and they ended up with the spy stuff. So I know it's not a perfect movie. It's a bit of a guilty pleasure one of mine, but it's badly advertised as Sophia Loren being billed above the headline there, because she doesn't appear in the movie till halfway through. She's in it for 10 minutes. Spoiler alert, she gets bumped off and she goes again. And so she's kind of, you know, she's not in it. She was the wife of Carlo Ponti, who was the producer of them. That's why she was in it. She was sleeping with the money man, essentially. But I'm intrigued what other people think of Operation Crossbow, because to me it falls a little bit into that kind of Battle of the Bulge, Where Eagles Dare kind of guilty pleasure, where you know it's not completely historically accurate, but you enjoy it anyway. Who else has seen Operation Crossbow? What are your comments on it, folks?
I have, and I think the thing with Operation Crossbow for me is it's a good story, but it's a bad film. And I think that's just my problem with it. It's just doesn't come across well on the screen. But the story could have been, the film could have been so much better than it was. That's my opinion of it. I just think the film story down.
I really like it. I've got a soft spot for it because I remember watching it as a kid. And Paul, forgive me, I'm going to dash and have my dinner in a second, but I will come back if you're still going.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah,
but it's one of those films where it seems to start off as a historical movie about this is how the Germans developed these wonder weapons. And then suddenly it goes into spy territory, and there's a bit of an unnecessary kind of romance hinted at with Sophia Loren. And then we're back in the historical territory again, and then we're in secret mission territory again. A secret mission which on the ground I'm not sure transpired quite that way historically, but I actually really like it. I love the score by Ron Goodwin. I've got that soundtrack compilation. I like the miniature work in it. There's some stuff that's not aged well, that's not great, but like the one shot I always remember is when the lady postwoman goes in to post the envelopes. This is when the V2s start dropping on London, and then they cut to a wide shot of the street, and the whole street just blows up, and they blew that street up for real because it was being demolished. So there's some really good bits in it, and George Peppard is great in it, and Jeremy Kemp and Tom Courtenay, isn't it, who plays the one who doesn't like to fly?
Yeah, Tom Courtenay's he's the great character because he plays the guy
Jacob
who is based on a guy. They've taken it. There are three. For those who don't know, they want to get people with a science background into Germany to understand what the Germans are doing with V weapons, as the Germans called them. So the SOE, OSS, whoever it's supposed to be in the film, they kind of don't make it clear. They do a new recruit, and George Peppard, Jeremy Kemp, they're all people who've been studying physics and chemistry and stuff at school and university, and they get roped into the special forces to go and then become agents. So it's a bit contrived in that sense. And Tom Courtenay's character is based on a Dutch scientist, but when he ends up dropping into Europe, he gets stopped by the police, but not because they think he's a spy. It's because the character he is pretending to be has been accused of murder in a crime within occupied Europe that has nothing to do with the war. And the thing is, he's being interrogated by the Germans, and poor old Tom Courtenay's stuck in. If he says, look, I'm not this guy who's a murderer, I'm actually a spy, they shoot him anyway for being a fucking spy. So does he just pretend to keep on being? And it's really, and Tom Courtenay's scenes are brilliant because he ends up, Anthony Quayle, who plays the double cross, the Anthony Quayle, who's a brilliant actor, by the way, underrated British actor, who was genuinely an SOE agent in Yugoslavia in World War II. We talked about this on a previous show. So Anthony Quayle he's a German agent, tries to get on the mission as a double agent, but fails because his qualifications aren't good enough. But he ends up meeting Tom Courtenay as a Gestapo agent in Holland. And before they shoot Tom Courtenay, Anthony Quayle says, no one's even going to know what you did. He does this great little speech where he says, but no, you're just going to die. You're going to, you're just tell us what you know. And James is having to go off now. So thanks, James. You're great. I'll let James say goodbye then, but then I'll carry on talking. Thanks, James. You're brilliant. I'll let you go and have your dinner. Thanks very much. Well, you can transfer back the History Hack Squad after this loan deal. Thanks very much.
Yeah,
Contribution was great.
thanks for that. Yeah, it's unfortunately it's just overrun. I had the message like the dinner's done. And it's like with all the stuff that's gone on with this week, I've not really ate a dinner on time. So it's like I want a dinner on time.
Yeah, you go. Thanks very much, James. That was great.
Thanks, bro.
Bye,
All right,
James.
see you later.
Hey, James.
Hey, James.
So going back to old Tom Courtenay, so Anthony Quayle does this speech saying you're just going to die. No one's going to know your name. You're dying for nothing. And I think that's my favorite scene in the film. You know, he's saying that no one's even going to know what you did. And that is the reality. When you look at what SOE and OSS and other partisan and resistance units did, we know some of the stories. Sure, we know some of the stories. But I always wonder myself, how many brave heroes were picked up and they were just shot, or they were gassed, or they're imprisoned, who we don't know what they did. And history, unfortunately, will never be able to go back and give a spotlight to some of these people who served their countries, but their stories have been lost. And so Tom Courtenay in the film represents to me that kind of unknown guy that went off to do something very, very brave and just got shot because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But yeah, I agree with you, Colin. It's a flawed movie the story is good, but it's not great. I'm interested to what Matt thinks, because you're the real film buff on this. Operation Crossbow, Matt, what's your feeling?
It's a great, one of those great sort of Saturday afternoon movies. My issue with it is rather niche, in that it's kind of responsible for the cult that's around Hannah Reich. Yeah, and it's a pity Claire's not here tonight to dive into that a little bit more. Because it sort of built up a bit of a rehabilitation for her, and she started popping up quite a bit after that in documentaries and things, and that leaves a bit of taste in my mouth. What was it Winkle Brown said about her? She was the most ardent Nazi he ever met. Undoubtedly a great pilot, but still, ever so slightly dodge, shall we say? But it's of its time, and I think a lot of the films that we've looked at tonight are very, very much of their time. And you talking about Tom Courtenay. I think John Mills is superb in it, despite the sort of rather small bit he's got. But I just struggle with with the Hannah Reich bit of it, because it's problematic given the woman who she actually was. And there's that. And sorry if I'm stuttering. I've literally just been sent a message from a friend of the show, Chaz Mena, who is a very happy, rather drunk man right now as he is celebrating.
Good old Chaz. Yeah, is that might that be concerned with some news that's come out of the USA about a certain election process? Let's not go down that rabbit hole. But I think, going back to Operation Crossbow, what's also intriguing is clearly during the production of it, they were getting pressure, and the director was to make it more James Bond like. That's clearly make more supervillains, have more lasers, have more, and you can see them under pressure to kind of fulfill that Bond. Hence the great spy mission title in the USA, and I think it suffers for trying to compare with Bond, because the thing about Bond is entirely fiction based on some very, very, Ian Fleming was involved in covert stuff, but Bond is fantastic, isn't it? And I mean that in it based on fantasy, and you can't take a genuine story about trying to stop the V program and turn it into my name is Bond, James Bond, pretty girl stuff. And that's, I think, what Operation Crossbow tries. I wouldn't be surprised if Sophia Loren was brought in very last minute to give that whole silly will they, won't they shag kind of middle bit of the film bit that, as you say, has nothing to do with the film. It's out of place in it's serious, as Lance said, serious wartime study at the beginning, serious wartime study, and then in the middle it has this will they, won't they, and Lily Palmer comes up, and but yeah, it's definitely of its time. I do like it. I must admit, I do like it. There's some great set pieces in it. The whole staging of the V1s with the flying bombs is really brilliantly done. As Lance said, the destruction of the street in London is very well done. And the end, despite the obvious kind of Bond lair kind of connection, that underground set is really well done. And then you have the Lancasters coming over to bomb it, and then they open the door. That bit's really well, even though the model work of the Lancasters is a bit poor. And John Alderton is one of the part. But my bit of trivia, I'm going to try and compete with Stephen there, is because you mentioned the Ron Goodwin theme tune of Operation Crossbow, but that was the A side of a 7-inch single. Who knows what the B side of the 7-inch single was? So Operation Crossbow was side A, but another movie soundtrack was the side B. And you don't know the movie, I bet, but you do know the music. Anyone know what the B side was?
Colonel Bogey.
No, it was from a movie called The Trap with Oliver Reed and Rita Tushingham about a trapper in Canada. But do you know what that music is for? You do know the music. I guarantee every one of you and everyone watching from Britain knows the music. The Trap theme tune. You know it? It's the London Marathon BBC tune.
Oh,
yeah, that's the theme tune to The Trap with Oliver Reed and Rita Tushingham. So that is did that kind of redeem my trivia? That trivia, yeah, that's.
I've run it twice, Paul. I never watch it.
Okay, I know you have run the marathon, Colin. Well done to you. But yeah, The Trap.
You're showing off, Colin.
Great movie. Completely forgotten now, but the theme tune is the BBC's London Marathon tune. So you did know that. You're all playing that song, and it's a great movie, actually. Oliver Reed is in it, but that was Ron Goodwin, and B-side of Operation Crossbow came out the same year. So that's my bit of trivia there. So just before we end, because we've got another 5 minutes, what movie do you wish you'd nominated? Is there anybody else's choice that made you think, I mean, Steve, so what would you have gone with?
Well, I saw Allied recently. Brad Pitt, Allied. Have anybody seen that one?
Yeah.
I watched that last night.
Joe watched it last night.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Quite like bits of it. Like the fact they built a Lysander for it. Like the stuff, because it isn't a blowing telegraph poles up film. It's actually completely different to that. And I like the fact that when he inserts himself into France so he can find out the truth about his wife. And I thought that was terrific. I thought it was really, really well done. And again, I like the fact that, it's obviously it's a big Brad Pitt film and they could go out and build a full-size rolling Lysander for it, which I thought was really well done. I quite liked it. I can't really think, I haven't seen Anthropoid. And I haven't seen Operation Daybreak for so long. I can't mention that one either. But yeah, I think I quite liked Allied. Quite liked it. So that was another possible I was going to mention.
Didn't mind it.
There was only one thing that really jarred with me in Allied, and it's when they're having the party at the house, and all of the doors are open, all of the lights are on, and it's supposed to be blackout, and that just it jarred with me that it wasn't right. That
no, you're quite right there. Yeah, you're quite right there.
And also, not the fact that the friend was a lesbian seemed to be a bit forced. That was a bit kind of, hello, I'm a lesbian, just to make sure we know that lesbians were involved in the war effort. I mean, it just seemed a bit contrived.
I was too busy looking at the Lysander. I forgot the lesbians.
You're the only person in the world who can say that,
and that Paul is the problem with my life.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You're looking at Lysander's, not like, I mean that
Did you mention that your partner left you earlier?
Allied is
welcome back, lads.
The second unit director on that, Stephen, was on the previous show we did, and he's going to come back on. He wants to talk about Allied because he's involved on that, and I think it's spectacularly shot. There's some great color, there's some great cinematography, there's some great scenes of desert and Casablanca and what have you. But it's all right. It's all right.
The Hampstead Heath scenes with the crash bomber are filmed about 2 miles away from where they filmed Went the Day Well as well.
Okay, again, back to there again.
Yeah, banter there.
So anybody else got a film they wish they'd nominated?
One I thought about, again, ties into Anthropoid, was The Man with the Iron Heart, which in the wake of Anthropoid seemed to get very little exposure. Didn't get a cinema release over here, whereas Anthropoid did. And it's based on that's one title for it. Another, you might know it as HHHH, which is based on which is the name of the book that it's based on, which stands for Hitler, Himmler. Matt's nodding his head. He's going to know the other two.
Heydrich.
Heydrich was Hitler's brain.
And,
Yeah.
Heydrich. It's the German for Heydrich was Hitler's brain.
Yeah. So it's very much about Heydrich, who he was as a person, really well played by an American actor who does a superb job of playing him, actually. It's almost like a biography of Heydrich, and then eventually it coincides with the anthropoid operation, and is probably the most realistic depiction of some elements of that as well, although anthropoid, again, also did a good job. That was a very interesting movie, and I made a lot of brave choices that you don't normally see, especially telling things from the German perspective and exploring them as characters and who they were, rather than just as villains, which in Daybreak and Anthropoid, Heydrich is, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Heydrich was a great guy, by the way, but you get to see a lot more about him and all his different levels of bastardry, and you get to understand why he was so hated, whereas those sort of bits were just a footnote, really, and especially in Operation Daybreak, I didn't really know who he was. So that's a very good film that's worth people's time. And the American release was The Man with the Iron Heart. I
have not seen that. I have to say, not seen it.
It's good.
I liked Anthropoid, although I didn't love Anthropoid.
It's an interesting one to do back to back with Anthropoid.
Yeah, absolutely.
The
and
book,
Lidits, the film about the aftermath, is worth seeing as a third part to that.
I've seen that. That's a great movie. The one where the final shot is the person running in the snow trying to find the town, and the town's been completely obliterated, if I remember rightly.
That's right. Yeah.
I thought the actor, from what I've seen of Anthropoid, because I think I bought my father Anthropoid with a load of other DVDs, and I haven't actually gone and seen it, but I thought the actor they got to play Heydrich was an outstanding physical match.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, remarkable.
One of the nice things about Anthropoid was that they, for a bit of trivia, which I'm sure Stephen knows, was that they shot it in all the real locations. So they used the real church. The place where they shot the ambush scene in Anthropoid was the real street. The car was in exactly the same place. They closed it all off using the actual the trams. They put the trams at either end of the street. So you had like these period blockades, but somebody filmed the whole sequence on their phone and put it up on YouTube, which I got to see, and then it got promptly taken down. Yeah. But I thought it was quite nice that they went and shot in the real places with the real.
And there's an author in that scene, John Martin, I think his name is, who's a stand-up comedian in Britain by day, but he also wrote a book about Anthropoid. There's a Facebook group, and I've completely forgotten the name of the Facebook group now. But anyway, he is, because he was an advisor, he is in like an overcoat standing at the side of the road when the assassination happens. And so there's an author in the scene in a kind of a cameo role, which is interesting. But yeah, well, I think we'll bring it to an end now, because we've been at it 2 hours now, and it's past my bed. That was fun. I enjoyed that. I don't know how people have enjoyed it watching it, but hey, there's nothing else to do. We're all in either UK or French lockdown, so it's either this or watching reruns on TV. So we've kept ourselves busy, and we've had some fun and a bit of trivia there, and so it was great. I enjoyed that. So
been fantastic.
in terms of what I've got coming up with World War II TV, I've got a program on the 14th. With Helen Fry about it's going to be a third part of my Operation Aquatint show, and that's going to be about the aftermath of Operation Aquatint and how the commandos from September 42 ended up getting lost in Europe, and we're going to talk about how Allied prisoners got back to the UK from France and other countries in the 42, 43, 44 period, based on Helen Fry's excellent new book MI9. Then I've got other things coming up. I've got some shows coming up about Stalingrad and set in Stalingrad, filming in Stalingrad. We can't do anything in Normandy now because of lockdown. But anyway, that was great, everybody. So thanks very much for joining. So Stephen, or Abs, as I call him, if you keep wondering why I call him Abs, that's his nickname, Absalom, because Tudor reenactment jesters and what, not jester, what's the word? What was your character in Kentwell Hall? It was
a million different characters.
But you were
that was a lifetime ago, Paul.
Alchemist kind of thing, wasn't it? Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, Matt's good, and Colin is good value all the time. And Lance, we'll have to bring you on with some other and talk more about the paratrooper series, because
I forgot to mention probably.
Oh yeah, talk about the Zoom thing coming up. Yes, talk about that.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that we're going to stream. We're going to do a table read of an episode of Paratrooper on Zoom, which we're going to stream live like this via YouTube. We've just done it with a drama about Colin Stagg, the guy who was nearly wrongly convicted of Rachel Nickell's murder in Wimbledon Common of 1992. And we did a 5-part drama. You can see it on YouTube. The final part's tomorrow at 2:00, called Persecution. If you look at that, you'll see how it works. And we're going to do the same thing with probably about 15, 20 actors. And we're going to do the Arnhem episode of the one with the Dutch boy. And we're going to do that. We're going to stream that live on YouTube. I think this side of Christmas, if I can get all the actors together to do a good job. But we won't have people speaking in German, so people will just have to accept everybody's going to speak.
It's okay, Lance. It's okay. It's just a read.
Let's when you've got a date for that, come on to World War II TV and kind of plug it. Not that I get thousands of views, but I get a few. And let's talk about what you're going to do and maybe bring.
We can do
it. Talk about it. Let's do a plug for it. Combine your audience with my audience and Matt's audience, because I think just even a read through would excite me to understand what you're doing and how you're going to try and present this history. I think, and we were saying before we went live, folks, that this year has been a shit year for everybody in terms of guiding and filmmaking and doing other things and projects and history. And those who sat back this year and done nothing and waited for it to go back to normal again, you know, they're the losers. You've got to be inventive this year. And this whole World War II TV came out of the fact I can't do anything else. And me and Colin and Mag and Duncan have been going out doing filming and stuff like that, because what else can we do? There's no tours here. So you can't make movies.
Scripts in lockdown.
Write scripts, get out there. 20. So Lance, we'll come on and we'll talk about that. But anyway, thanks very much. Thanks very much to Paul and James, who've already left us. They were great. Paul Beaver, we'll get him on again and talk him about he provided the helicopter in Skyfall and all that kind of stuff. And that was cool. And Matt, you have got through the whole show without mentioning Hawker Typhoons. That is,
I'm sure somebody's made money out of that somewhere.
Yeah, on my Matt Bone bingo card, I haven't had to tick off Hawker Typhoon, unfortunately. So I don't have a line. I haven't got house. Colin, you got through it without insulting anybody. That's good, you know.
I think politeness to myself, but I do want to say one thing. I find it really interesting. Lance, this goes back to you with your film choice right at the start. I find it really interesting with my background and upbringing as an Irish Catholic that the French chose to call the resistance who went on to murder the Algerians the Red Hand.
Yeah.
And if you think about my background, where I come from, that says a fucking lot.
The reader says, Collins says he's Irish, but he sounds like a Geordie. That is one of those paradoxes that people will have to just accept. But he said, that is, when I first met Colin, folks, and he said, he's Irish. Why does he sound like a Geordie? That is just, don't understand. Some things you don't need to know, okay? This is a need to know basis, and you don't need to know why an Irishman sounds like a Geordie. The real story is probably not that interesting. In fact, your mother's Welsh, for goodness sake, isn't it? Your passport is just, we don't know. Anyway, thanks very much, Colin. You're brilliant. We'll see. We will discreetly meet up tomorrow at the British Cemetery to offer our respects.
Not allowed to say that.
Not to see anybody outside the same household. Joe, thanks for joining in. It wasn't. You learned something. We didn't get too drunk. It was good. Your contribution was brilliant. Stephen, you were great. Lance, if you're still there, thank you very much, Lance. That was brilliant. So great. We'll see you all again on World War II TV. I'm going to end the show now. Thank you very much, already. We haven't beaten the longest record yet. The longest show was 2.5 hours. You haven't beaten that. We've got something to aim for next time, but that was good. Thank you very much for watching. I'm ending now. This is Paul Woodadge, World War II TV. We'll see you all again. Cheers. Goodbye.